Tonight, we'll have shelter by then.
I hope so.
Yeah, in the LA area.
Right.
And let's take you back there live now. Our Dan Adams in Northridge, one of the hardest hit areas by the quake. Dan?
Right, Jennifer, we're at the Northridge Meadows Apartments, which we showed you last hour, and you can see they're losing light here, but that doesn't mean the rescuers are giving up. In fact, you can see Los Angeles City Fire Department here. We understand they're bringing lights in now also so they can work in through the night. Behind me you see part of the apartment building that collapsed. That used to be a 3-story building. It's now down to only 2 stories, and the bodies of 16 victims have now been removed by some of the dog teams and some of the rescuers that looked through here. Now, the good news is that 8 other people have been found alive in here. They've been taken to the hospital, and apparently they do not suffer from life-threatening injuries. They say that basically the top 2 floors collapsed down onto the first floor, and there's only about 18 inches space right now in what used to be the first floor of the buildings. Now, a few minutes ago, I talked with some of the apartment residents who survived this morning, as well as some of the rescuers to find those who didn't survive.
The building was collapsing, we were just all jammed and nobody could get out. It was, yes, a ton of people yelling, "Get me out, help, help," and then every time it shook, you know, we thought we were just going to see those people die and the whole building was going to collapse. It was unbelievable.
There's parts of different sections within this whole complex that have dropped about a story. And where exactly, I can't describe to you, but I saw several sections back to that had collapsed at least 1 level.
So in other words, the top story is collapsing down onto the bottom story then?
That's what it appears to be.
What's the likelihood of finding somebody in there alive now?
Well, I mean, there's been cases in earthquakes that people have survived for 24 hours up to a week in Armenia and all that stuff, but we won't have that problem here. We're going to make that search and determine that within the next few hours.
At about 3:35 this afternoon, a 5.5 aftershock hit. When that did, some of those rescuers dove out of some of the windows that you see here behind me. They plan to go back in tonight, though, and start looking for more. By the way, Los Angeles Mayor is expected to hold a press conference here in about 15 minutes. At that time, he's expected to announce a dusk to dawn curfew. Back to you in Sacramento.
Thank you, Dan. And as Dan pointed out, we have seen some miracles in other earthquakes. People pulled alive from the wreckage of the I-880 collapse.
Oh, yes.
So
It's becoming 2 stories in a matter of seconds. And it was at that place that Dan Adams told us that 16 people had died.
That was the most dramatic scene. It was the most deadly scene. That's exactly where Dan Adams is right now. We'll check in with him live. Dan?
Right, Beth, as you say, that's where we are right now, and you can see only 2 stories left of what was that 3-story apartment building right now, where rescue efforts are still underway. Late news is they overestimated the number of casualties here. Latest is they've revised it downward now to 14 victims. However, the search is still going on. Now, as you can see behind me, they've brought in emergency lights tonight, and the Los Angeles County Fire Department and search and rescue team is beginning what they are calling the 4th search here. Let's go ahead and show some of the videotape that was shot earlier today as some of the earlier searches were being done with the rescuers as well as the dog teams. What we understand right now is that a special camera is being brought in, a fiber optic camera, which can be snaked through some of the rubble in really hard to get places. They're going to be using that tonight with special lights to try to get into some of the areas that have been severely collapsed that they even haven't been able to get dogs into now. That will be the 4th search that has taken place inside this building, and they feel relatively assured that they have found all the victims so far, but they say they are ready to continue the searching for at least another 72 hours in case there are more victims here. Now, I talked to some of the folks who were trapped inside the building. They said it was simply frightening, that they thought that it was the end of the world. Now, as we've shown you here, this building, we've shown you that plenty of times, but I want to pan on over here past all the television crews that are working here, the lights that you see there. And this is looking down Reseda Boulevard here in Northridge. You can see there are no lights. What you see are those headlights from some of the cars that are coming down here, but the traffic lights are out, the street lights are out. It looked very much like San Francisco did the night of the big earthquake there back in 1989. Unfortunately, this is the scene over many areas right now, and as Los Angeles prepares for the nighttime, we understand that there's going to be a curfew that's in effect for this area from now until sunrise tomorrow morning. So certainly it's going to be one of those nights that Los Angelinos remember for a long, long time, a dark night in this area.
Oh,
Beth and Dick?
The amount of media around there. Is there someplace close that the folks from the building went to, Dan?
Go ahead and pan on over here, Dave. You can get some idea. All these lights are from separate television crews. There's San Francisco next to us and all down over there. A lot of these folks arrived here this afternoon, as you mentioned. This is just part of it. As far as where the victims are, some of them I just talked to a short time ago, and we'll be hearing from them later on. They are going to be settled in places tonight provided by the Red Cross, so they're back here right now, and the Red Cross is going to move them to shelters in this area for tonight. But as many of them said, all their belongings inside this building right now, and they simply can't get to them.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the report, Dan. An estimated 15,000 people
Going through a little bit of an aftershock.
Yeah, and we want to finish one storyline for you. The two people who were standing by the collapsed house waving were neighbors of the two people who lived inside that home, and the two people inside were killed. So there were continual stories of disaster, as there were continual stories of rescue today.
Well, one of the biggest areas of disaster, as you saw, was that Northridge apartment complex centered just over the epicenter of the quake. That was the largest single loss of life taking place there. And Dan Adams joins us live tonight with more on those who were killed and those who were rescued. A dramatic, emotional day at that apartment complex, Dan.
Boy, Jennifer, what a day and now what a night here. We're at the Northridge Meadows Apartments. As you mentioned, you can see emergency efforts are still underway right here. This is the area where the two upper floors collapsed down onto a lower floor, and unfortunately some bad news within the past hour. The body of the 15th victim has been found here. Now, aftershocks are still rolling through the area. There is a curfew that's in effect until dawn tomorrow morning, and it's going to be quite some time before Southern California returns to normal. The streets of much of LA nearly dark tonight, lit only by the eerie glow of emergency vehicles and overhead by rescue choppers.
It's like a nightmare, you know. I mean, we never expect to be in a situation like this.
At the site of the biggest rescue efforts, survivors of the Northridge Meadows apartment complex return tonight. People like 77-year-old Joseph Kalita and his wife Sophie.
There was somebody sitting on our shoulder, no question about it. I don't know how I pulled my leg out from under the beam, but I got it out.
The Kalitas were pulled from their first floor apartment after the upper two floors collapsed. Physically, they're okay. Emotionally,
I see the coroner's limo, I call it a limo, and they take the people out in the basket, and this morning I saw, I don't know who they were, take the gurney in to get some people out, and then another basket, and it tears me up.
Those who lived here say there was no warning, no initial subtle shaking. It struck suddenly and violently.
Everybody was screaming or crying or moaning or crying out for help or walking in a daze. It's just like the end of the world. That's what I thought was going on.
Tonight, rescue crews using special cameras probe the compressed first floor, trying to confirm that no one is still trapped inside.
I can't say that not everybody is out of the building. And again, that's why the search is so thorough and will continue.
The search will last into tomorrow, but for those who escaped, the impact of this quake could last a lifetime.
You just do every prayer that you can. Just hopefully somebody upstairs is listening to you and he listened to us because we're still here.
And again, the body of the 15th victim was pulled from the wreckage of that apartment complex tonight.
600,000 or 700,000 people were without electricity, so Consolidated Edison is really doing a good job restoring power to the greater Los Angeles area. With me right now is Dan Adams, and as you can imagine, this first day after the quake, traffic was a mess, and you had a chance to assess it all by air.
Yeah, it kind of depends on who you talk to and where they were going also, as far as if it was a mess or if it was a nightmare or if it was a breeze getting through. Now, to get an idea, in our car, we drove through the roads of Southern California. From Air 10 way above, we flew over the freeways and we listened to radio traffic reports.
Measuring progress by the foot and the inch on many southland freeways. We'll be using a micrometer to measure it in some cases.
The predicted commuter nightmare was and wasn't.
Now the 5 is closed to southbound. As Skip said, you have to get off at Lyons. Northbound, they're diverting you off at Rockford.
Indeed, there are many freeways closed and will be closed for some time. Among the areas hardest hit, the San Fernando and Santa Clarita valleys.
The southbound side of the 14 still closed at San Fernando Road, so traffic's backing up from Placer to Canyon.
Here, Highway 14 collapsed on top of the I-5, and I-5 itself collapsed near Magic Mountain, stranding a truck, 2 cars, and an RV on an overpass that now goes nowhere. What that means is the residents of the Santa Clarita Valley heading into the San Fernando Valley are all jammed up on a smaller surface streets, and a 5-mile trip, well, this morning, it's taking 2 hours. The line of cars snaked for miles, further slowed by darkened traffic lights.
You don't have light signals working anywhere, and you've got to wait your turn. Treat the intersections like a 4-way stop sign. Look out for each other out there.
Yet in most cases, traffic on freeways moved. In fact, moved well, as many people stayed home for a second day. While in Air 10, we also grabbed a shot of the Northridge Fashion Mall, bullocks crumbling into itself. We also saw efforts underway to salvage a train carrying toxic materials that derailed yesterday, a major incident in itself, dwarfed by the magnitude of the quake. As we were flying, another aftershock hit, triggering landslides in the San Fernando Canyon. But one bright spot today, summer-like weather bathed Los Angeles as the Southland begins to recover. And that certainly helps some of the rescue efforts here because the weather is simply beautiful. In fact, the high here today was 83 degrees. They say tomorrow in the upper 80s. Now, as far as the traffic is concerned, Alan, they're telling us right now that they want people to carpool. As we saw in Northern California during the San Francisco earthquake, if people don't carpool, the traffic situation for months is going to be a mess here.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully people will get into the habit of carpooling even after the I-10 and the 405 are open.
That's the key to keep the traffic jams down here.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Authorities are assessing the damage, as we told you, but while they are assessing the damage, the victims are trying to pick through whatever the quake did not destroy. And for that part of the story, we're going to go to Dan Adams for that.
It's hard to believe that people are getting their lives back together when you look at something like this, Alan, but indeed they are, but it is very, very slow. There is some good news today, though, and some things that we're seeing around here, a little bit of cleanup, people trying to recover a bit, trying to recover some of their items, in fact, and some good news with regards to electricity. In fact, this whole area behind me here was blacked out.
Can you tell me what it says? He knows Spanish. Tell him what it says.
Power is back on here. That's the good news, but really things are still very far from normal.
And who hasn't been back in there yet?
At Northridge Fontana Apartments, a frantic rush this afternoon by tenants who at 4:35 yesterday morning lost their homes. How much time are they giving you to get stuff out?
20 minutes.
20 minutes is it?
That's it.
20 minutes to salvage what's been collected in a lifetime.
We're just getting personal belongings. We're not coming back here. Too much of a rude awakening yesterday morning, man.
Others didn't even need 20 minutes.
We came in here, everything fell.
Many store owners returned today for the first time. Some, like Jen Kim, didn't want to.
When I walked in, I just wanted to go. I just wanted to go back. And then I closed the door and I stayed outside.
In Northridge, streets and sidewalks still littered with glass, power out, and stores like Thrifty that were selling some items from their heavily damaged store quickly closed when our cameras showed up.
Thank you so much. Good luck on your endeavors.
Indeed, getting supplies is very difficult. When this McDonald's became one of the first to open this afternoon, a line formed to the back of the restaurant.
We got to get something to eat before I get home and see what the house looks like.
How long you been in line here?
About a half hour now. I moved about 5 feet.
With the prospects of another dark night tonight, armed National Guard troops now patrol the streets. Still, despite the disaster, quake victims who lost everything haven't lost their sense of humor. What are you going to do?
Well, I ain't going to Disneyland, that's for sure.
Well, you can joke about it anyway, but a lot of people certainly can't. In fact, tonight, 95,000 electric customers are still without power. They say they won't have it back until sometime tomorrow at the earliest. Also, we've just learned that another curfew is in effect tonight for most of Los Angeles. People have been told if they have no business on the street, they should be off the streets by this time. Now, we saw a lot of the damage, and certainly it's been rough in some very tough areas. Mark Schumacher has been there. Mark, you've seen some of the worst of it, I guess.
We certainly have, Dan, and we got to point out something real quick before it gets away here. I know this is sort of off the cuff here, but you're looking at the Goodyear blimp. It's flashing messages not only in English but in Spanish about things like boiling water and concerns about the emergency. So that's rather an interesting use of the Goodyear blimp. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this, but either have homes that are totally damaged or basically haven't been inspected and they have to get back into. But this is just where the story starts. Dan Adams has got some more stories about the hardships here. And Dan, over our shoulder here, you see up in the sky, folks, we've got some black clouds, and that is a cloud from another fire. What can I tell you? The saga continues.
It's one of the problems we've been seeing all along, Mark, and of course the fires are not calming down. We have them all day long. You hear the fire sirens just a few moments ago. Now, there is some news on utilities, good news and bad news. In fact, power has been restored to all but about 2,000 customers, but as far as gas and water go, that's entirely another story. In fact, many geysers spew water from streets and sidewalks like you see right here, flooding the gutters. And when utility crews in San Fernando were digging to find a water main break this morning, look what happened. An adjacent 2-inch gas main weakened by the quake ruptured. Several city blocks were cordoned off once again and dozens of nearby residents evacuated.
My neighbor came knocking at the door and said, get out of the house now because the gas line broke. So we're going to the park. I got my cat.
Your cat's in there?
Yeah. She's scared. I don't want her to get scared by the dogs.
How about you?
Am I scared? I'm not happy.
The break that prompted her evacuation is just one of perhaps hundreds of breaks that are still spewing water and in some cases gas.
Water leaks are there all over. You can't even count them. There's so many of them. Can't keep up with them. Overloaded.
Boy, in fact, a lot of people have been affected by those breaks also. A lot of folks still do not have water, and utility crews say it could be weeks before water and gas in some cases will be restored. Now, all week long, we've been telling you some of the dramatic stories about the people affected by this quake. Today, we went to Sylmar, one of the areas that was hardest hit, and talked to one man there whose home is, I guess you'd say it was trash. That's the best word to describe it. 71-year-old Alan Novick allowed us to follow him around today as he shared the saga of how the quake has changed his life.
We were bombed in the war, but it's nothing like this. I figured this was it. The damn building was coming down.
What did it sound like?
Oh, it was so much noise, you never believe it. You can't describe it. It was a terrible noise. And I kept hollering. I was going up and down. I said, stop, 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 stop. And finally it stopped. And then the house, it started going like this. That's when I got out. Boy, they did go all over every place, didn't they? Emptied everything out of the... Remember these? I had 6 of them. There they are. It's like somebody, a giant was walking around in here and taking stuff and heaving it out and closing the door. It's amazing. Yeah, I came in here for some reason and the floor was all wet. I guess because it came out of the toilet. Whoop. Hey, my old MASH bottle of vodka didn't come down. MASH 4077 vodka. They're looking at you, huh? It's amazing how in 30 seconds your whole life can change and you find out that everything you treasured and valued in the past, like papers and junk, don't mean a thing. They're worthless. So I'm going to get rid of all mine and start a new life with something more important to do than save papers in boxes.
Well, a lot of people are looking at life differently down here now after the past couple or 3 days. Now, by the way, kind of an interesting note, Mr. Novick that you saw there is the father of News 10 photographer Dave Novick, who I've been working with here all week. And it's kind of been frightening for Dave because his phone has been out for a couple of days, and we didn't even know the fate of Dave's dad until yesterday when his phone was finally put back into order. So fortunately, that's okay. Now, something has happened since we came on the air here. In fact, I want to show you that a couple of supply trucks have just arrived here at the park, and people running on over, as you can see right now, waiting for, we understand they have clothing inside here. So obviously a lot of folks definitely in need still, and these trucks just arrived. The lines are starting once again, and I see a food truck pulling up behind us over here, so you can imagine the lines will probably be forming behind that as well as people here continue to try to survive after this quake 3 days later.
Looks like even a little sense of desperation there too, Dan. I suppose so, when you've been out of your home for a few days and you're not sure what you're going to go to next.
I want to tell you one interesting story. We stopped at one of the supermarkets right after they opened today. The power had just been restored, and this is one of the large supermarkets like a Raley's or Bel Air up in our area, and the shelves were just stripped of food immediately. Water, charcoal, and lunch meats, dairy products. We got in there maybe a half hour after it opened, and the stuff was already gone.
Thank you, Dan. We'll be checking back.
Well, now let's bring you up.
Team coverage takes you to one of the San Fernando Valley's newest quake communities. It's a tent city, and it's in the city of Reseda. And that's where Dan Adams joins us live. Dan?
Right, Beth, as you said, we're in Reseda Park right now, which for the 3rd night in a row, as you can see behind me here, is home for 100, maybe even more, the quake victims here. Now, these folks that we see behind me, which we will be talking to in a few moments, have decided to abandon their homes. However, there are many, many more that are equally as bad off as these folks are, who've decided to tough it out in their own demolished neighborhoods.
It's the walls are all cracked down.
For Elsa Becerra and her family, plywood on the front lawn, a couch, and a blue tarp constitute home.
Now I know how the homeless feel, you know. Yeah, that's how it is. And with babies and everything sleeping out here in this cold.
This section of San Fernando is predominantly Hispanic. Their modest existence severely shaken. No water, little food, now no home. Their plight so far largely ignored.
We really got nothing at the house right now. Everything's all tore up, you know what I mean?
You have water?
Nah, the pipes are broken right now, so we ain't got no water and stuff like that.
During the night, 3 truckloads arrived here from San Diego. They brought lots of canned food, supplies like this, also towels, over here a box full of blankets, and as you can see, a lot of water as well. And as word spread about this, The line outside grew.
Okay, Michael, at the front door, you ask them how many people are in the family and if they're at the same address.
This helps somewhat, or is it just like a Band-Aid almost?
Well, you know, it's kind of like a tourniquet. It's stopping the bleeding, so nobody's gonna. No, we're not gonna lose anybody, but it's not an ideal situation.
This afternoon, with power restored, some stores tried to reopen, but aftershocks keep knocking down plans to restock the shelves.
I'm scared, man. And I say, okay, I take over there. I wait for the other one.
So you're not even going to try picking it up anymore, huh? You're going to wait for the next aftershock?
Yes, yes.
And right after we talked to her was another aftershock that knocked more things off the shelves. Obviously, it is a desperate situation for a lot of folks, including the folks who are out here. Mark Schumacher joins me now with kind of a tour of what has become home for hundreds out here.
And Dan, you know, it's not just a tent city. Come on along with us for a minute.
Aftershocks and a major hospital suddenly evacuated this afternoon. The action taken after building inspectors found signs the hospital could collapse in another aftershock.
Now, News 10's Dan Adams was the only Sacramento reporter on the scene as hundreds of patients and hospital workers were forced to flee. Dan joins us now live from the Southland, and tell us about this emergency, Dan.
Right, Jennifer, it was St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, which had been providing emergency care to some of the quake victims. Now, earlier this week, each day, local inspectors had looked at the hospital. But this morning, state inspectors came in and ordered everybody out within 3 hours. This is why. Huge cracks have opened on 2 of the 3 wings at the hospital, exposing twisted steel rebar that's supposed to hold the 7-story building together.
The safety of the patients and the employees of this hospital is what our major concerns are, and we'd rather get them out now while everything is somewhat calm, get them to facilities that can take care of them, rather than us have to do this in the middle of the night after another major aftershock.
So at about noon today, hundreds of the hospital's doctors, nurses, and staff frantically begin emptying the hospital of vital equipment and patients.
This is an internal disaster. This is a true internal disaster, which means every single employee in the hospital is put to work. They clear out the equipment from their departments that can be salvaged, but the #1 priority is still the patient.
196 patients, many elderly, were wheeled from the cracked building. Taxi cabs pressed into service to transport them to other hospitals.
Oh, the evacuation stuff, what can you say? We have to be prepared for all these kinds of changes in our world, and that's the truth.
Other patients who were able to walk out on their own are wondering how safe it was to be in the hospital for the past 3 days.
When I got out of recovery, they just said, evacuate, time to evacuate.
Yeah, they were evacuating. I heard them talking about it this morning. Evidently, they're not happy with what the engineers saw or whatever.
Well, that's why the action was taken later on today. Now, 2 of those people that were evacuated this afternoon were victims who had been injured in the quake. Most of the patients were taken to Cedars-Sinai Hospital and UCLA Medical Center. I asked one of the hospital spokespersons, with several other hospitals closed in the area, and with so many victims from the earthquake, is there a shortage now on rooms? They said, surprisingly, no, they have been able to make space, and fortunately, there are enough other hospitals open that are caring for the victims that have been displaced and injured by this earthquake. Dick and Jennifer?
Well, that's good. Now, Dan, we understand that's quite a famous hospital and a landmark there, and in fact that Elizabeth Taylor was in being treated for a hip ailment. Was she one of the people who were evacuated today?
We understand that she was not there at the time. However, there were some patients that we understand that they tried to sneak out some of the back entrances or exits, as the case might be, that they didn't want the public to see, and I didn't see anybody there in particular that stood out, but I'm not a big moviegoer anyway, so I wouldn't necessarily recognize them.
Yeah, a lot of people, whether they're famous or not, affected by this. Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Effects of the earthquake quite literally rippled all across this part of Los Angeles, and joining us now with more on the effects of this quake in other places is Dan Adams. Dan?
Right, Dave, as you mentioned, most of the damage that we've showed you so far has been from here in the San Fernando Valley, towns like Sylmar and Northridge. However, 25 miles south of here, Santa Monica is in a mess as well. And the folks down there are somewhat angry, actually. They feel they have been somewhat ignored. Block after block of Santa Monica and Wilshire Boulevards in ruins.
We look around our community, the whole thing is in shambles. I mean, if in any other situation, this would be front page news around the world. There's so much that went on here, so much suffering.
The pictures tell the story. 15 new cars smashed when the Mazda dealership collapsed. The 70-year-old First Christian Church, whose new motto is, "We've been knocked down, but not out," is set for demolition tomorrow. And Clara Fincy, who lost virtually all her stock in her museum artifact store, today learned her building is now condemned.
A nightmare. A nightmare. Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Do you want to stay in Southern California?
I don't know. I really don't know. I was thinking to move, but how?
Other, perhaps less visible victims, Santa Monica's homeless who survived the quake but fear for the future.
Shelters have been demolished. Churches, they're old buildings, and they simply won't be able to help anymore.
The curfew here has now been lifted, and traffic, day and night, is beginning to jam once again. Among those on the road, unemployed construction workers hoping to find work.
God blessed me in one way. In one way, it's a sad thing to say that, but that's the way it is. We'll be busy, all of us again, in Southern California.
Also on the road, tourists who have added quake-damaged buildings to their must-see list while in Southern California.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Welcome to California for vacation.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I asked her if she would come back to Southern California for vacation. She said, sure, there's so much to see here. By the way, I also mentioned that the curfew that had been in effect the past 3 nights has now been lifted. However, it's not going to be easy if you're thinking about looting in this area. Extra security guards have been called out. Los Angeles Police has extra deputies on duty throughout the night tonight. Dick and Beth?
Some of that is happening, Dan. We've heard from people, too, that the looting is an issue even though they've lifted the curfew.
That's why some of the folks are fearing to leave their homes. These folks have left, obviously, but some are staying in their neighborhoods just to keep guard on their home, even though they're sleeping in the front yard.
Yeah.
Well, the other issue is help for all of those people.
The aftershocks continue to rumble through here today, and they have done some more damage. Joining me now with more on that is Dan Adams. And Dan, I guess it took a toll, a little more.
It did, certainly, Dave. As you know, we felt them here in Southern California again. In fact, Highway 134, the Ventura Freeway, was closed down for a while as engineers could check one of the overpasses there. And Cal State Northridge had hoped to reopen on Monday, now will not because of more quake damage today. Meanwhile, we've learned that this weekend, demolition of some of the condemned buildings will finally get underway in earnest. Among the first to go will be the 7-story building in Santa Monica. The Barrington building on Olympic Boulevard severely buckled in Monday's quake. Now, while we were shooting this tape this morning at 10:39, the 4.6 aftershock struck. It's tough to hear with the helicopter overhead, but you could hear the building creak from a block away where we were. Yet doctors whose offices are in the unstable building are angry that they cannot go inside to recover their records.
All the records we have is inside the building. So what should we do? We don't even know where to start from here. All our equipments and just everything, the records is very important for us.
Frustrating for you.
It is, it's very frustrating. I don't know what to do.
Another badly damaged building, the Pacific Contractors School. Now, these guys are supposed to know how to build safe buildings, but they fell victim themselves. Their building condemned. There are some real oddities with this quake, like at the Santa Monica Video and Audio. This tape obtained exclusively by News 10 was shot by the store's owners shortly after the quake, and it shows 60 TVs, 85 VCRs, lots of other equipment down, but somehow the huge aquarium complete with sharks survived.
As you can see, there's a lot of damage to the actual outside the shark tank, but the inside was saved.
You're lucky.
You're really lucky.
And the sharks are lucky too. So are thousands, literally thousands of dogs and cats that escaped during the earthquake. Today, many of them were reunited with their family. And I'll tell you, coming up on News 10 at 6 o'clock, Dick and Jennifer, we're going to have a great story on some happy reunions between families and their pets.
I can imagine emotional reunions, members of the family, the four-legged kind.
Your demolished construction school there will stick in my mind for a while.
Those poor folks like everybody else.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, tomorrow marks the 20,000s of pets that, in fact, were separated from their owners during the quake are still waiting to be reunited. But today, Dan Adams visited the West Valley Animal Shelter in Chatsworth and found a happy ending to one disastrous week.
My mother's legally deaf, and he's her ears and her bodyguard.
Kathy Kroviak and her mother Ann are looking for Caesar.
He also
before the earthquake, and he wouldn't pay attention to me.
Kathy and Ann, who we'll get back to in a moment, join hundreds of others who are swamping animal shelters trying to find four-legged family members who Monday morning bolted in panic. Since Monday's disaster, 250 dogs and 75 cats have been brought just to this shelter alone. Hey guys. Hi doggies. Now many of these animals are confused and frightened.
All pretty traumatized, and then he takes off just running, not knowing where he's running to.
I'm glad we got a happy ending for you.
There have been several happy reunions.
It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Bea and Joanna Killian were separated from their two cats, Kimba and Jasper, when the Northridge Meadows apartment collapsed, killing 16 people. Today, they learned Kimba and Jasper survived.
I bet they thought I deserted them, the poor things. All I can say is thank you.
Now they know you did.
Thank you so much.
You're a fine boy. Yes, you are.
As for Ann Kroviak, tears. This afternoon, she got her best friend Caesar back.
And this is Caesar. Caesar. He's
I got him back. My ears, my buddy.
Yeah, if she even falls down, he goes to pick her up. I mean, he
God
licks her until...
God made these creatures, and they're just like us, except they look different.
Great story, huh? By the way, all the animal control folks say that the pets that were picked up during the quake will be saved indefinitely. And Dick, one thing I wasn't aware of, they say that cats that fled during the quake eventually will return home. That's if they have a home to return to.
Yeah, they know their way back pretty accurately. All right, thanks so much, Dan. Great story.